These are the real problems with The Exorcist.
Nobody expected it. Nobody believed it. And nothing could stop it. The one hope. The only hope. The Exorcist. Rated R.
The Exorcist was released on December 26, 1973, the day after Christmas, so that pretty much guaranteed its counter-programming, as this movie is nothing like a good old-fashioned Christmas story. As a matter of fact, it's the complete opposite. If anyone isn't familiar with this movie, I'd be kind of surprised because it stood the test of time. It just celebrated its 50th anniversary, and we're still talking about it, and it's based off of the novel by William Peter Blatty, who also wrote the screenplay. And if you're unfamiliar with The Exorcist, I'm going to give a quick synopsis here. Just in case you don't want to watch the movie, you're too afraid to watch it, or whatever it may be. It's about a young girl played by Linda Blair who becomes possessed by the devil. And such extreme measures had to be taken that the Catholic Church consulted in bringing in an exorcist. And that exorcist is played by Max von Sydow. The whole movie, I really shouldn't say, had a very good, easygoing film production because there were a lot of problems. Otherwise, it wouldn't even be on this podcast. But some of those things stemmed from realistic encounters to superstitious ones. But there are a lot of other little notes that I wanted to break down before I talked about some of the more extreme things that took place in this movie. For example, this movie is pretty groundbreaking in the sense that there are no opening credits after the title of the film. Now, sometimes that's pretty commonplace, but it was unheard of back then. And director William Friedkin wanted to start the film immediately. So there's no cast, no credits, nothing. Because, you typically get your opening credits where you have the stars' names, the music, the writers, the producers, the director, and then the film. But in this instance, the credits are rolled after the film. And this was actually the one time where the director is the first credit listed. So I don't know if it's because he wanted to be the first one to be mentioned afterwards. But you'll see a lot of movies like that now where the movie will close. If it didn't have opening credits, it will begin with the director. So this is actually the first movie to ever do that, which is groundbreaking in itself. So the first story that I wanted to start out with was a bit of a crazy incident about the film. So there's a scene in which Reagan, again played by Linda Blair, is having to conduct medical experimentation to try and figure out what's wrong with her. Like they were talking about some kind of psychological disorder that she may be happening, and they're just trying to get to the root of the problem. Naturally, they think it's something neurological, so the only way to figure that out is to do an MRI. And I don't know if this practice is still done the same way that it is in this movie, but there's a graphic MRI scene in which she undergoes the procedure. And I guess you had to take a large needle IV basically, and they had to inject the fluid or whatever it was to go through your body so that way the x-ray can read it properly. I just had an MRI done a couple of months ago and it's nothing like that anymore, so it seemed like it was a pretty intense situation. And what's funny is like the needle goes into her arm. I had to look up to see if that was actually something that they did to Linda Blair, but it wasn't. The director William Friedkin actually asked that day if there was anybody that was going to be undergoing an MRI that they can shoot the needle going in for more, I guess, realistic authenticity of the scene. But that's actually not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is the technician that is setting her up was a real radiographer named Paul Batson. Now, Batson was dealing with alcohol abuse and domestic disturbance abuse in his real life. Like he was going through a couple of issues, and he just happened to be the radiographer there at the hospital. So again, for the authenticity purposes, Friedkin used him to do the scene with. And what turns out is that Batson, in 1979, a couple years after the film had been released, was convicted of the murder of film industry journalist Addison Verrill and was sentenced to a minimum of 20 years in prison. Now, in 2003, he was released on parole, which ended after 5 years. Now, prior to Batson's trial, police and prosecutors implicated him in a series of unsolved slayings of gay men in Manhattan, known as the Bag Murders. Now, the killings he had reportedly boasted about or, bragged about while he was in jail to other inmates. Now, the prosecutors brought this up at his sentencing hearing. No additional charges were ever brought against him because they couldn't find actual evidence of him being around those murders, and they couldn't tie DNA evidence at the time and, all those other kind of issues that would hold up a case like that. Aside from him just bragging about it, I guess his own word wasn't admissible as a testimony or as a confession. So they threw that out, and he wasn't exactly exonerated for it because he was never charged. That particular experience inspired director William Friedkin to make the 1980 film Cruising, starring Al Pacino. Now, it's based on a novel written a decade earlier, but it incorporated Batson's storyline as the city's leather subculture in the 70s, in which Batson had identified. So it was just crazy to hear that. I mean, that has nothing to do with the movie per se, but just the fact that something like that to start is already just creepy. I mean, it also goes in line with everything going on in this movie already. So right off the bat, and again, at the time they didn't know because the murders didn't take place until years after, but it's just kind of eerie that man, Paul Batson, was there in that scene. Moving on to The Exorcist. There are a couple of identifiable scenes in this movie, very popular scenes in this movie, and one of those scenes happens to be the scene where Regan projectile vomits at Father Demi. Now, the vomit was intended to hit Jason Miller in the chest. Jason Miller is the actor that played Father Demi. What happened was that the plastic tubing misfired and it hit him in the face. So initially, that scene that you see where he is getting sprayed on the face, I mean, that's all authentic. His reaction of shock and disgust while wiping the vomit is genuine because how they mix the vomit. They even put smells in there to make it even seem more disgusting. Jason Miller himself admitted in interviews that he was very angered by this mistake because he didn't think that it was going to spray in his face. And he actually thought that it was going to be closer to the chest, as the director, William Friedkin, had said. And Friedkin and Miller had already had an issue with each other because William Friedkin, I mean, I guess I could just say that he was all about visceral reaction. He wanted people to be on their toes. He wanted to be cast and crew to just be at the ready to undertake any kind of thing that he threw at him. So basically, there was an incident also with Jason Miller where William Friedkin fired a gun near his ear to get an authentic reaction from him. He told Friedkin that he was an actor and that he didn't need a gun to act surprised or startled. He could do it on his own. So they had this verbal confrontation about it on the set. Why Friedkin had a gun on the set, nobody really understands why, or if it had blanks, if it had real rounds, because there's nothing in the movie that necessitated a gun. I mean, you have a couple of detectives in the movie that would carry a firearm, but looking back at the film itself, you don't ever see them pull out their weapons. So again, why he was doing that is beyond me. Now, Jason Miller fared a lot better than the two leading actresses, Linda Blair and Ellen Burstyn, as both of them suffered severe injuries while filming this movie. Let's start with Linda Blair first. And there was the scene in which she is laying down in the bed and her body is being moved up and down, up and down. She's doing a sit up and down, and it looks as if it's out of her control, which it was, due to a rigging harness that malfunctioned when it became loose. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to play a clip from the docuseries Cursed Films that's currently streaming on AMC Plus and Shudder. So if you want to go and watch that, by all means. But there's an interview taken with Linda Blair speaking on this specific incident, so I figured it would be better to hear it from her than from me. But here is that clip.
Let me tell you, I'm laced into this piece of equipment. It is literally manipulated by men. In this particular take, the lacing came loose. I am having my back pounded. I mean, I'm crying, I'm screaming. They think I'm acting up a storm. It fractured my lower spine. No, they didn't send me to a doctor. It is the footage that's in the movie.
According to an interview that Linda Blair had done on USA Today, she had another on-set injury from another film involving a motorcycle, and with multiple falls from horses, she developed scoliosis. Now, the actress had sought both conventional and alternative medical treatments to help her conditions. Luckily, she's been able to find some relief, although she could certainly do without the lifelong repercussions of her injuries. Now, Blair did believe that The Exorcist made her into the person she is today, stronger in both mentally and physically. Sadly, Ellen Burstyn also suffered a severe injury while filming the movie. She suffered a back injury, to be specific. Now, the scene in which Regan slaps her across the room, Burstyn was pulled to the floor with a wire. The force of the pull ended up permanently injuring her. I was able to find an interesting interview that Ellen Burstyn had done, and also in this interview, you can hear the head stunt coordinator, who I couldn't find his name exactly, but they have contrasting perspectives of this incident. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to play this interview, and you will be hearing Ellen Burstyn speaking on the situation from her perspective, you know, the victim who was in pain, who suffered serious injury, versus the head stunt coordinator that was hired by Friedkin to pull her as hard as he possibly could. Now, I'm going to let you know that he has a bit of awkward laughter during this, and it's just kind of odd considering the situation, but I'm going to let you listen to this and you can hear for yourself.
I had a rig around my midriff with a wire coming out the back, and the stuntman was pulling me.
So we took her back the first time, and it was a good shot. And Billy said, we're going to do it again.
I said, Billy, he's pulling me too hard. I can get hurt. And Billy said, well, it has to look real. I said, I understand, but I'm telling you, I could get hurt. And the stuntman was standing there listening to this, and Billy said to him, okay, don't pull her so hard. But as I turned away, I felt them exchange a look.
And he said, give it to her this time. And I said, really? And he said, give it to her. And this is Ellen Burstyn, right? You're a nice lady. And so I said, okay. So when I hauled off, she came completely off her feet.
You see me hit and you see me reach for my back. I screamed in horrendous pain. Billy motioned to Owen to tilt the camera down on me. And I saw it and I was so furious and said, turn the effing camera off, because I couldn't stand that he was willing to just get a quick shot of it before they called the ambulance, you know.
Ellen didn't like it too well, and she went to see her chiropractor, and chiropractor said, you're all right. Just a couple of days, you'll get over the soreness. But that's show business, I guess.
It was way beyond what anyone needs to do to make a movie.
So if anybody's keeping up with things, we have both of our lead actresses were injured while filming this movie. We've had not only that, but there were fires all around the set. Inexplicable fires. People didn't know if people were lighting them, cast or crew playing pranks on people. The odd thing was that they would be closed for the night and they would come back the next day, and some of the sets were completely burned down, except for Reagan's room. So I think that was really freaking the cast and crew out. Not to mention the fact that during the production, many family members from the cast and crew were passing away, just coincidentally. Now, this also included Max von Sydow's brother and Linda Blair's grandfather, and not to mention the fact that one of the main camera operators' baby was a stillborn while they were filming the movie. It's just really bizarre, it's really eerie, nobody can really explain what's going on. So the best idea that director William Friedkin could come up with was having the on-set exorcist, a man by the name of Father Thomas Birmingham S.J. Now, he was a Jesuit priest, and he was an advisor to the film, especially the exorcism scenes. Now, since he was there on the set, William Friedkin thought it would be a good idea for him to exorcise the set of all these curses, of all of these misdeeds, and all of this bad luck. He went on and did the blessing, and apparently after that, everything was okay until the closing of the film, or film production. One thing that I thought was really interesting about Father Thomas was that he never actually performed any exorcisms in real life. So I don't know if he was just lying to get the job as the advisor or whatever it was. But yeah, it was a bit ironic that his only exorcism that he had ever completed was to bless the set of The Exorcist. Upon its release, The Exorcist was a smash hit at the box office. It was number 1 for 2 months, and it ended up being the highest grossing movie of 1973, beating out other films by at least $20 million. So clearly there was something that gravitated to the audience, but that did come at a certain price to the cast and crew, especially Linda Blair, as people were calling her and giving her death threats, saying that she's bringing the devil into this world. And they really couldn't separate some of the fact from fiction of the film. And, there were these religious zealots that were coming after her. She really didn't get to prosper in the success of the movie, which was very unfortunate for her. So I think Linda Blair pretty much had a tough run of the entire production of this movie, from when it started to when it was over. And I think that it's really unfortunate because she is the driving force of the film. And if anybody deserved to receive more accolades than anybody, it was her. But luckily, she did receive accolades in terms of Academy Awards, Golden Globes, and other awards-nominated categories, because she was nominated for Best Supporting Actress in a Motion Picture, making herself one of the youngest actresses to do so. Now, The Exorcist itself received 10 nominations altogether, including Best Picture, Best Actress, Best Director, Best Screenplay, and it actually won for Best Screenplay and Best Sound, which, in hindsight, those are good technical awards to receive, but the way that this movie's lasted for the last 50 years, you could definitely put it in the category of missed opportunity for Best Picture. Thank you again for listening to this episode of the Real Problems Podcast. Now, if there's something that I missed, please feel free to share in the comments on any of the posts. If you would like to email me, please do so at reelproblemspodcast@gmail.com. I'm listening to all of your emails out there. And like I said, if there's something that you wanted to share that I may have missed about this movie, please do so, and I'll read it on the next episode. Because when you're doing research about movies like this, especially popular ones that have obtained a certain level of mythology about them, you're going to find out new information, you're going to leave stuff out, and I really don't like doing that. I typically do like to reach all of the broad points. If there's something else that you would like to share, please do so. And also, if you like this episode, please listen to my other podcast, the Screen Addicts Podcast, that's streaming on all available platforms, including YouTube podcasts, Spotify, Apple Podcasts. It's everywhere. And that one we've been doing for a little bit longer, and basically we just talk about movies and TV as a whole. So there's really nothing too specific about it. We just talk about everything over there. And again, thank you for listening. This is Cinema Steven Sosa, and that's a wrap.